So welcome to this refresher video on key terms for share investors. This is going to focus on operating leverage, as it's called, more about that later. But basically it's part of a series of three, because I'm going to argue in this tougher economic climate with inflation still a little bit out of control, interest rates a lot higher than they used to be, a destabilizing war going on and so on, China under economic pressure, I'm going to argue that firms are under more pressure and investors should therefore monitor three bits of jargon fairly carefully. You'll see these bits of jargon quoted all over the place. One is operating leverage, that's coming up now. The second is financial leverage, you'll have to wait to video 2 for that one. And the third is the working capital cycle, and that will be video 3. So 3 videos coming up, 3 key bits of jargon. So back to today's plot, if you like, operating leverage. That is a fancy way of describing the relationship between fixed costs and total costs. Now, fixed costs are the ones, as the term suggests, I suppose, that don't vary with sales. They can step up or down, but they don't tend to glide up and down with sales. And if you're thinking, well, what would be an example of that? A classic couple of costs that fit into that category have been largely fixed. In other words, independent of the level of sales, or the directors have to write the check whatever happens. Property's one, staff salaries are another. Now, variable costs, on the other hand, vary with sales. They do tend to graduate up and down with the level of sales. So for a manufacturing company, think things like raw material costs, utilities, and so on. In other words, you don't buy more stock of raw materials if you're not planning to sell more product, and so on. So what are the operating leverage rules for investors, if you like? First of all, high fixed costs generate high operating leverage in the jargon, and high operating leverage can be great when sales are booming, when the economy is doing well, when interest rates are low, when inflation's under control, but it's risky when those conditions no longer hold. And essentially, it can lead to quite dramatic cost cutting and changes of strategic direction. Why? Okay, very simple numbers example here, bear with me. Let's say a business has sales of 100 million. Fixed costs, that's those property and staff costs I mentioned, are 80 million, and the variable costs that do change with sales are 10 million. Very simple example, profits are the 100 minus the 80 minus the 10, so 10 million. Happy days, 10 million profits on sales of 100 million. Not too bad. But what happens in this high fixed cost business, loaded up with property and staff costs, if sales fall by just 10%? And the answer is sales will drop to 90 million. Fixed costs will assume remain fixed at 80. Variable costs come down by 10%, but that leaves you with a profit of just 1 million. In other words, profits have gone from 10 to 1, a 90% drop for a 10% drop in sales. Now, the reverse is true on the same model if sales rise, but I'm talking about an environment here where companies are under increasing amounts of pressure when it comes to revenue. And if you're thinking, haven't you skewed the example just to make a point, to make the dramatic 90% fall in profits? Not really. I can point to sectors that have that kind of cost structure right now. I'm thinking of things like banks, airlines, and professional services firms. High staff costs, high property costs, locked into those regardless of the level of revenue or sales. So there you have it. Operating leverage, 2 more terms coming up in videos 2 and 3. If you'd like to know more about this particular term, then do go to my library, killick.com/learn. The Investing Principles tab might be a good one to go for. My How to Invest in Equities guide also deals with this topic at a reasonably basic level. That's editor@killick.com. It's a guide with a kind of light blue cover. And occasionally the research team talk about this kind of jargon. It's quite current right now. So for a copy of Confidant, the quarterly magazine, again, editor@killick.com.